So I would like Ben for us to convene this second session, which deals with the subject that is before us on participation, rights, and inclusion, as we do the mapping progress in Liberia for the 2020 Ibrahim Index of African Governance. Our moderator for this session will be His Excellency Dr. Al-Hassan Conteh, who is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Liberia to the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He has concurrent accreditation to the Republics of Benin and Equatorial Guinea, and he also serves as Liberia's permanent representative to the Economic Community of West African States at their head office in Abuja, Nigeria. He has served as the chair of the ECOWAS Permanent Representative Committee and the Mediation and Security Council of ECOWAS at the ambassadorial level, and he did that from 2017 through 2018. He's currently Dean of the West African Ambassadors in Nigeria and Deputy Dean of African Ambassadors in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Dr. Conteh is also the co-chair of the board of the Africa Peace Fellows Program at the Center for African Peace and Conflict Resolution at California State University, Sacramento, United States of America. Prior to his ambassadorial appointment, he served with great honor as the president and vice president of the University of Liberia, which I may add is my alma mater, and research fellow and adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Ambassador Kante is a published author. He holds the doctorate degree in regional science and demography from the University of Pennsylvania, a Master of Arts degree in demography from the University of Pennsylvania, another Master of Philosophy degree in demography from the United Nations Cairo Demographic Center, and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in geography and demography from our common alma mater, the University of Liberia. So we are delighted that Ambassador Conteh will be participating as moderator on this very important session. I would like to point out that the Ibrahim Index of African Governance is a key assessment tool for introspection for African governments, and also for those who participate in assisting to fill gaps that are not intractable gaps in Africa's development process. And so I would like to invite Camilla Roca, who is head of research at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, where she leads on the foundation's analysis and publications on governance, and Inez Schultes, who is a senior researcher at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, where she works on producing analyses and publications on African governance, to introduce to us what has been done with respect to the IIAG. Camilla and Inez, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And we are now at the second panel, but I really wish to reiterate from the side of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation our thanks for this kind invitation. Myself and Ines are representing here the team who is behind the production of the Ibrahim Index of African Governance. So we are extremely grateful for the opportunity to have a discussion and an exchange with policymakers and other stakeholders involved in the day-to-day governance in relation to Liberia and beyond. The presentation will take you through a couple of different points. First of all, we will briefly look at the Ibrahim Index of African Governance in terms of its composition and methodology, just a brief introduction to set the basis. And then Ines, my colleague, will take you through the results for Liberia, so to kick off the discussion with some of the data taken from the index. I'm going to launch our presentation that you should be able to see here in a second. And as I said before, a quick intro on the index. First of all, how do we define governance? According to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, governance is rooted in the relationship between citizens and their states. And it's in fact the provision of political, social, and economic goods that citizens have the right to expect from states, and states have the responsibility to deliver to citizens. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation is committed since more than a decade to strengthening leadership and governance on the continent. And one of the tools that we contribute to this discussion is the Ibrahim Index of African Governance. You can see here the framework of the index. This is an index published every 2 years that looks into a 10-year time frame of governance, allowing to track progress, highlight challenges, as well as compare data and counter performance across all these governance dimensions and across 54 African countries. So what about the setting up, the building of the index? We have a very strict methodology that goes from selecting the data all the way to calculating and analyzing the data. Just to give you a brief example about the source, which I know it's one of the key focus and one of the key questions that we receive. How do we select the sources for the index? For the time being, we are using more than 40 sources in our index, and the criteria for selecting these are strictly technical and of statistical nature, basically. So besides being a governance proxy, therefore, besides being a measure of the dimension of governance that you saw in the framework, we need sources to cover at least 33 of 54 African countries to allow for cross-country comparability, which is one of the added value of the index. Cross-country comparability, as well as regional comparability and country groups comparability. And we also want the index to be based on relevant and recent data. So there are also statistical criteria related to the need to have fresh data for at least the past 3 years within the decade. How do we calculate the data? Obviously, various sources use their own scales. So there is like a technical statistical methodology for normalizing all the scores into one classification that goes from 100, which is our highest score, to 0, which is our lowest scores. And then all the data is subsequently aggregated according to the different layers of the index, from indicators up to overall governance level. It is important to note that for those of you who are interested in this detail, more than 90% of our indicators are based on more than a source or a variable. Certainly, this is very much dependent on data availability and those criteria for selecting sources we highlighted before. But it is quite important to note this because relying on more than a source or a variable, it's important to eliminate or at least mitigate bias of the data sources. And hopefully we will be able with the years to come to increase as much as possible the number of sources included in the index to make our indicator a stronger measure of governance. Before jumping with Ines into the results for Liberia, I just wanted to provide you here with a quick glance at what the continent is doing within this latest 10 years of governance that we're going to discuss in Liberia. What is important to note is that within the last decade, the continent has improved in governance, and this is important to note because we need to take stock of the progress. However, the sort of path towards this improvement has been led only by 2 of the 4 categories of the index. You can see here these green areas represent progress. So progressive foundation for economic opportunity and human development have been leading change, positive change on the continent. However, on the other hand, at the same time, this positive change has happened simultaneously with declines in security and rule of law and participation, rights and inclusion. This is just food for thought, but also some elements for contextualizing the Liberia results. And my colleague Ines will now take you through those. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Camilla. So if you first have a look in general at how Liberia is doing in overall governance, so we see they have a score of like 47.9, which equals to rank 27 in overall governance out of 54 countries. So they're kind of sitting right in the middle of the ranking table. Liberia has improved its overall governance score over the last decade by plus 1.2. But we also have been seeing that since 2015, the score has declined again declined again. So, and this is one of the largest declines on the continent for this time period between 2015 and 2019. If we have a look at what is driving these changes, we can see that overall, across the decade, Liberia has actually improved in 3 of the 4 categories. But we also see, and this indicates the pink color is that in security and rule of law and foundations for economic opportunity, we do have seen declines since 2015. And then we also see, and this is the theme of the discussion in this panel, participation, rights and inclusion as a category has declined both over the decade as well as over the last 5 years, and even at a faster pace within the last 5 years. So this is quite concerning. However, when we look at how Liberia is doing, they're still ranking 16th compared to all other African countries. So actually doing fairly well in that respect. They're ranking fairly highly. It's the highest ranking category. So how has this happened? What's this happened in participation, rights and inclusion so that Liberia has declined? So if we look at the respective subcategories, which will come up here, we see 3 of them have declined over the decade, and all of them have continued to decline as well between 2015 to 2019, and participation and rights have even declined at a faster pace then. For inclusion and equality, we do see that it has slightly improved since 2010. However, again, we see the pink color, which means warning signs, which means between 2015 and 2019, this subcategory has declined as well. So this means in the mid-period of the measure we're taking, all of these subcategories have declined. So what are the specific areas of concern that we see in participation, rights and inclusion? So if we have a look here, so we see there's a few that have driven the change over the positive change over a decade. So we see better equal political representation, better equal socioeconomic opportunities, more equal political power, more equal civil liberties for women, and an very slight increase in political pluralism. But as we can see as well, the table with those indicators that have declined is much longer. And also, if we look a bit deeper, we see, for example, that all of the indicators that belong to the rights category have declined over the last 10 years. There's one exception, which is protection against discrimination, where we haven't seen any change. But this also means Liberia is scoring 0, which is the lowest possible score since 2010 for this indicator. So that's not a very positive story, unfortunately, either. So if we look a bit at like the main indicators that have driven this change, so digital rights have declined the most within this category. Also socioeconomic opportunity for women, the freedom of association and assembly, media freedom. So again, also something which is quite concerning, which is civil society space, which if you look at the score, you see Liberia scoring 95. So it's a very high score, and Liberia actually scores first on the continent for this indicator. So they're one of the best countries in Africa with the most open civil society space. But as following again a continental trend, we also see a decline and a closing off here. So these are just a few of the kind of results for this category, and I hope the panelists can elaborate a bit more on the situation on the ground in Liberia in regards to these results. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Madam Schultes and Walker. Ambassador, the floor is yours. When you unmute, please, sir. Ambassador, you are muted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Host. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Host, Councillor Cooper, for your introduction, and to the presenters from the MIF for presenting Liberia's scorecard. I have the honor to introduce our distinguished panelists who will speak briefly for 5 minutes each about PRI. In the order of presentation, I see on the screen Kula Fofana, so I'll introduce her first. I don't know if the other presenters are available, but let me start with Kula. Kula Fofana is the president of People's Foundation Africa, an organization working for marginalized and hard-to-reach communities in Liberia and across Africa. She is also the CEO of My New Crib Realty, an emerging real estate and construction company in Liberia. Before co-founding the foundation, Kula served the Liberian government as Assistant Minister for Youth Development. She co-chaired Liberia's Vision 2030 and headed the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, Adolescent Girls Division. Kula ran for the Senate in the recently held by-elections in her county, Grand Cape Mount in Western Liberia. Despite not winning the election, she continues to engage her people and provide services for her community. Kula is a graduate, a candidate for the Master of Science in Violence, Conflict, and Development at the School of Oriental and Social African Studies of the University of London. So Kula, you have the floor. I can't see the others, so I don't know if I should introduce them. I see only one panelist. Mr. Host, what do you suggest?
I think there's call on the.
Well, please, perhaps maybe Kula to proceed. And then also we have as a panelist here, Councillor Dorliae, who's Deputy Minister of Justice for Economic Affairs.
Okay, can I proceed to introduce?
And if you don't, if you would like, I could add a few words of introduction for Councillor Dorliae.
Well, I can do the introduction if you.
Very well, if you have her body. Thank you.
Dorliae is a lawyer with 10 years of public service in Liberia. She is currently the Deputy Minister for Economic Affairs of the Ministry of Justice and has held previous positions as Assistant Minister for Economic Affairs and legal consultant in the Department of Economic Affairs. She is also an advisor to the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, eligibility unit, which monitors various international governance indicators and proposes policies and programs for improved governance in Liberia. She is a graduate of Drexel University School of Law and is a member of the Liberian National Bar Association and the Pennsylvania State Bar. Thank you, Mr. Host. So I think I will ask Kula to make her presentation, followed by Councillor Dorliae.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Conte, and good afternoon. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And let me begin by extending my appreciation to the EGS Center as well as the Mo Ibrahim Foundation for organizing such an important discourse, but more importantly, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of such important panel. I will be looking at the subsection of inclusion and equality in the context of the indexed. However, we all understand the area Liberia sits, particularly when it comes to the post-conflict context. Liberia has come from a long period of civil conflict with many challenges. And after looking at the indexed report and seeing that, particularly when it comes to inclusion and equality, that it has bounced back, is something that is interesting, with a score of 46.3%. But however, if you look, if you go beyond that and try to unpack what the overall report is, you'll see there are some issues and there are some challenges. And I would like to use this opportunity to also delve into those within the context, of course, of the 5 minutes that I was given. So as I've said, Liberia comes from a place of conflict, and for a period of 14 or plus years. Currently with the population of about 5 million. However, with many challenges, I know many of our Africans country colleagues will really see Liberia as why the population is so little, but with all of these challenges, you should all be like one of the best countries. However, with an opportunity of such to be able to go through an introspection, and with this form of report, it is important to be able to dissect a bit. So under the context of inclusion, I saw that equality, specifically on the indicators, equal socioeconomic opportunities, and talking about the promotion of equal social integration for young people. And we saw that equal socioeconomic opportunities scored to a plus 0.45, which is an increase. And there was also on public services, there was a slight increase when it came to equal political representation, which I was reporting as on a worse trajectory. Equal political power, it was also lower, and civil liberty scored poorly. So in those contexts, there are a few things that I want us to look at. First, we took a look at the population. And our population, majority of whom are below the age of 35%, that is the young people, 70% of our country's population. And in many contexts or aspects can be a positive thing, but also can be a negative thing. So within the context of the young people, you'll realize that there are lots of challenges when it comes to high rate of unemployment amongst the young people. And there are young people who were participants in the civil conflict, and they're still in the street, and there are a large group of young people, and right now on the ground, ghettos and substance abuse issues are very high in all of our counties. And our borders are very porous when it comes to access to narcotics and drugs, for the young people. And even within the educational sector, where we believe or we hope that our school systems should be places where our kids and children go to attain education, but they're also becoming places for delinquent young people. So most of our young people, they have something called Good Friday or Special Friday, where they have access to these substances. And those are things that we really should start thinking of. Unemployment rate is very high amongst young people. And within the context of women and girls, who are oftentimes made vulnerable, the aspect of reproductive health and rights, political and economic employment opportunities, which is very low for young women and girls, and access to justice. is also on the low. Under the context of minority group, Liberia is a country that looked at the issue of minority, basically on religious minority. Liberia is a Muslim, and they're the two higher or what we would call popular religious group, Christianity and Islam. However, Muslims have over the years felt marginalized to a larger extent and continuously call for religious representation through holiday, for instance, or even through opportunities to have access to education or job through the political structures, which they've continuously called for. There was, in fact, recently, one of the lawmakers within the legislature introduced a bill to ensure that Liberian Muslims have what he called Islamic holiday. And that generated a large conversation. And beyond just the periphery of this, it also speaks to our ethnicity, the ethnic divide between the natives and Congos is something that have permeated our social, political, and body politics for a very long time. It also goes deeper to the issues that have to do with citizenship or ownership or being a part of something. So at the core conversation or dialogue of our citizenship or a conversation around dual citizenship, it has been something that most people are seeing that there's not been a lot of progress on this dual citizenship or citizenship, because again, from the very beginning of how the country started, there has really been this issue of ethnicity, something that as a country, we have not really been able to deal with, because it's like a double-edged kind of situation. And land issues are also something that we should all think of as a red flag, and to be able to look at some of the situations that may emerge if these things are not taken seriously. And women political participation have also declined very recently. Before now, during the time of Her Excellency, Madam Sirleaf, there was an increase of 11.9%. Now, the women representation, particularly in the legislature, have really reduced to somewhere around 8%. And it's increasingly seen that women are not really getting interested in the body politics, or there has not been a lot of support to be able to support women candidates who participate in these elections, because as we know, politics in Africa is resource intensive. It's also challenging. It's also the energy is very high. So if a woman have contributed and spent her resources in these processes, sometimes it becomes very difficult for her to want to come back in the particular space. So you will see many women who have contested before. They'll tell you, I'm not interested in running again. I want to do something else. So, I mean, these are things that as we look beyond the index or what is reported, we need to try to make sure that these things are worked on. And finally, I would like to add that Mo Ibrahim, as well as the Afro Barometer, have really done a very good job in terms of documenting these issues as it's related to the governance structure within on our continent. What we need to be able to now do is that how do we connect these informations to our governing structures? For example, how can we have at the end, I mean, this will be my recommendation, that there needs to be a dialogue or a conversation or something that will relate directly to the governing structures, where our government will see this report and be able to specifically work on these things. Because sometimes, I mean, I sometimes think that we do a lot of this work, but there's a disconnect between the people who should actually be doing the work on the ground and and how to ensure that these things are worked on. So again, I look forward to our dialogue and the discourse as we go along. But these are a few things I wanted to highlight when it comes to the aspect of inclusion and equality. Thank you, Dr. Conte. Did you hear me?
Yes, I heard you, and I said thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I would now like to invite Councillor Dorliae, Dorliae, to take the floor. Councillor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Conte. Just to be sure everyone can hear me clearly, I think I've been having my internet's kind of been going in and out. I apologize. So just want to make sure I'm audible. Okay, great. You know, let me just add my voice to everyone and say it's a pleasure to be with you all today, and I am grateful to the EJS Foundation for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I want to say a special hello to Councillor Cooper. It's great to see you here today. This panel represents a unique opportunity for me as Deputy Minister for Economic Affairs, and having worked on economic matters during my time in government. This category, participation, rights, and inclusion, it's, you know, a bit outside of my comfort zone. But I think one of the reasons I perhaps was asked to participate is because over the past 2 years, I've become very interested in, and I've seen the value in how governance indexes can be used to guide policies and programs and thus improve governance outcomes. I think an example of this is the recently ended judicial conference and the business climate conference that was done not too long ago grew, you know, out of a direct result of having looked at some of these international matrices and seeing that there were things that we needed to have dialogue on it and try to discuss and find ways of improvement. So in this regard, I look forward to the discussion and to learning from the contribution of the panelists and the participants here today. As was said, the Abraham Index is a comprehensive measurement of governance in Africa, and it provides specific data, which is not based solely on perception, and I think that's one of the strengths of the index, that when analyzed and used by governments can help to improve good governance in Liberia. As we've heard, the 2020 index shows that Liberia is 27 out of 54 African countries in overall governance and is among the 10 highest scoring countries in this particular category. So while Liberia is generally participatory, inclusive, and protective of rights, we again saw that there are some challenges, and in particular with regard to public perception, and also with regard to rights in terms of specific freedom of expression and others that were highlighted by Inez. So we do know some of the contributing factors to that is impacting Liberia's standing on the scorecard. And there have been, I believe, extensive discussions in government and civil society on some of these areas, including around how we can increase participation of women in leadership. But despite the challenges, Liberia has made significant progress, I think as is shown on the scorecard, in the protection of rights, including new legislation, the Kamara Press Freedom Act, the Domestic Violence Act, although there is some work to do in that regard. I note that in the presentation by Inez that, you know, there's been a negative 3.5% decline in participation rights. And so we can ask the question here and have the discussion, you know, how can there be such a seemingly steep decline, and yet Liberia is in the top 20 of African countries still on protection of these rights? And I think part of the answer to that will be that some of the variables are event driven. So there are specific events that may have contributed to that, but overall, it's not indicative of the general policy direction and governance framework in Liberia. I'll give an example. Liberia has, in terms of press freedom, Liberia has over 30 radio stations, including local radio stations. And digital rights, I believe Liberia is protective of digital rights we can see that, especially as it relates to social media freedoms and the ability to express oneself, like there is not a lot of, let's say, censorship in Liberia of those rights. People are free to go on social media and to engage in political processes and discuss issues of the day and really, you know, hold the government to account a lot of times on some of the issues that people are experiencing. So I think some of these events that have perhaps impacted Liberia's standing is not indicative of our policy framework and the governance stance in Liberia. I agree that more needs to be done, and we'll have that discussion here today, I'm sure. I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but I just want to say again, thank you for allowing me to participate, and I hope, you know, I bring some value to the discussion, and certainly as someone in government and dealing with these indexes and looking at how these indexes can improve governance, we'll look at some of the discussions here today and recommendations and see how some of those can be incorporated into the work that we do. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Dorliae, also for your excellent presentation. We have only 2 out of 4 panelists, and we haven't said anything much about gender rights and participation. So, Mr. Host, I don't know, should we proceed only on these 2 that we have heard? What is your suggestion?
I suggest, moderator, that we proceed on the 2 that we have heard, but also open the chat to conversations on the other subjects relating to gender and other forms of participation. I would suggest that might be a useful way to proceed. And if I may, with your permission, just throw out for consideration by Councillor Dorliae, because she serves as Deputy Minister for Economic Affairs, if what elements she sees in her role, the Ministry of Justice's role in the negotiation of contracts, concession agreements, etc., that could help to further the participation of various economic groups, various gender groups, various socio-economic groups in the participation process and the inclusive process.
Okay. Thank you. Before the panelists, before Councillor Dorliae answers that question, I think let me just refresh our memory from my perspective of what we heard. Councillor Dorliae said that this presentation is not her forte, but you know, she referred to a recent judicial conference, and you know, that gives some indication about you know, the discussion that she provided, and she also mentions that Liberia high ranking, so to speak, 27 out of 54 in the IIAG, and is doing well with rights. Although there are some challenges in rights and freedom of expression. She, however, said that their protection of rights in Liberia has done well with press freedom and domestic violence. The dilemma is that although Liberia is doing well at the top, you know, the top scores are high. When you start drilling down, I think the panelists talked about that. Then you have some, you know, some issues with rights, although digital rights and press freedom are protected. She gave the example of over 40 radio stations and so on. For her part, Kula stressed more of the demographic dividend, the problems of the demographic dividend, especially youth high unemployment, issues of drugs and delinquency. I should mention a little bit about the rights of women, issues of ethnicity, the historical aspects of that, the dialogue that is currently going on with dual citizenship, and the participation of women. She cited a specific example, 8% in the legislature. And she concluded with the fact that citizens' voices, as seen by the data from the Afrobarometer, have added value, to the dialogue, which should continue. So with that overview, I'll now open the floor with some questions, starting with the question that Councillor Cooper posed to Councillor Dorliae. Probably Councillor Dorliae, you probably want to start with that before we pose additional questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Conte, and thank you, Councillor Cooper, for that question. I think that we've recognized that a lot of times what has happened in the past is when we negotiate these agreements that would have significant impact on the lives of communities and the country as a whole, we have not gone to the various communities and tried to involve them. And so a lot of the times these agreements tend to look as national projects and national development, but without accounting for a lot of impact on the various community, except as it relates to, for example, a lot of these agreements will have community funds within them. One of the things that government did in trying to change that was revising the Land Rights Act, as I'm sure you'll recall, Councillor Cooper, which tried to ensure that communities would participate more in the process and have more of a voice where government would seek to enter agreements on their land. And so the requirement now is that communities have to have a voice in that process. I think that's one great way that can increase participation in the process for ensuring that communities are engaged. There's also a greater push towards ensuring communities have a voice, even in terms of the forestry sector. I can say that that's one big area where the Community Rights Act has made it such that communities are not only engaged in the process, but actually, what's the word? Actually are the ones that are driving the process. They own the forest, they give it out, give out the commercial terms upon which their forest will be harvested. So I think over the past 10 years, there have been a lot of efforts to increase participation in terms of the contracts that government enter that will impact the community. Certainly there's more we can do, because even though we do have the laws on the books now, at times there are still challenges in ensuring that communities are involved. And so we do have to make more efforts to engage the communities, particularly on concession agreements and such, to make sure that we're getting the input of not just the community leaders, but also community members as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Kula, I have a question for you. I know you participated unsuccessfully in running for the Senate. You are one of our dynamic up-and-coming young women. The presentation that was made within the IIAG context showed warning signs, as the presenter said, when you look at the overall governance, it's high, but when you start going down to, especially given the issue of gender, for example, political power and representation of women, it's very, very low. Over the past 10 years, it dropped negative 3.8 points. What factors do you think can assist turn around, so that we have an acceleration of the political power of women and representation of women in the next 10 years or so, in your view?
Thank you. I think there are a couple of things we need to look at. First, one thing, and when you talk to women candidates or those who have contested, you will know that one of the major reasons that has been challenge for women has been resources. Galvanizing resources for political participation is challenging. Also, this whole political institutions, how we've institutionalized our politics within the political parties. So sometimes the way women are pushed, women are relegated to being in women wings, that they just do all of the handiwork when it comes to the preparation for meetings and other things. But when it comes to the core functions or the core participation within those political parties, women are not on the key decision-making table. And it has to take a lot of processes. One is on education. We have to be able to educate our women, but also support our women, just beyond the rhetoric of, women's representation, or, just the normal political rhetorics that go around that let's support women. But to the core, we must do these things with our resources, giving women the opportunity to be a voice. Like one of the things that the EGS Center is doing to be able to give women politicians or women interested in politics a platform to explore, to network and dialogue. But beyond all of those, women need to be given resources or shown means in which they can raise resources for political offices. But beyond that, most of it will just remain in the talking stage. And in addition, especially when it comes to women interest, because it's one thing, women who are already interested to contest or be involved in political decision making. There's also the younger generation of women who also have not seen the need, or because of all of the challenges, the way women are seen. For example, the elections that was held, to mention two young women, Mrs. Cornelia Kratokba, during her election in district number 13, there was a serious political violence, as well as Ms. Tilia Ure in district 15. Those young women who came up to contest, the level of political violence that was melted against these women, and even women who tried to put their hands up to say, I want to contest, there's so much negative energy that goes towards these women. So it makes it very difficult or challenging for other young women who have interest to say, oh, if they're treating other women in politics like that, politics is not somewhere I want to go. But at the core of it, if you look at our population, about 49% of our population, they are women. So if we cannot open the spaces and ensure and support the young women who are interested in getting involved in decision making, but also at the core in our governance structure. So within the government, and one of the other things that we need to highlight also is within our governance structure, where we have the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislature. Even within the law school, for example, there are very limited of women in those places who are interested in going to the judicial branch of government. And in this executive, women are in the lower level positions, where at the appointed position, there are very few women who are in administrative and ministerial level position. So we all need to be able to have these dialogues and say that if we're looking at our population, not that women are not competent, there are lots of competent women out there. We must be able to open, the floor and encourage women in our governance structure through the executive, through the legislature, as well as the judiciary branches of our government.
Thank you. Councillor, I see we've gone 5 minutes over our allotted time. Should we continue with the questioning? What do you suggest? Councillor, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. I think we can continue for a little bit.
Okay. All right. Let me turn to Councillor Dorliae. If you look at the presentation that was made, although we've done rights, I mean, you gave the example of press freedom, etc. But if you look at the 4 indicators under rights, the rank range in 2019 range from 9 to 39, the 9th position being personal liberties, the 39th being protection against discrimination. However, despite this relatively improved scores overall, especially in freedom of expression, media freedom, digital rights, the trend between 2010 and 2019 declined significantly, ranging from minus 7.7 overall in rights. Then for protection against discrimination was 0. I don't know whether this was due to the availability of data. But in your view, how can we seek a turnaround in the next 5 years or the next 10 years in these for these rights indicators? Again, they are personal liberties, freedom of expression and belief, media freedom, digital rights, and protection against discrimination. I don't know if I'm clear. Did you hear me, Councillor?
I'm sorry, I had a bit of, I think I did hear most of your question, which is, as it relates to rights, some of those have the change is 0, and not sure whether that indicates a lack of data and what we can do going forward to improve those. I understand correctly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well.
Okay, great. So, as I said before, I think, as Ms. Fofana said, Liberia has come from a very trying period in its history. But I think over, the last, since the civil crisis, Liberia has done a lot to improve personal rights and liberties and ensure freedom. And where there were questions or issues lacking, I think Liberia has been very willing to have the discussions about those things. And one of that, as I pointed to before, would be the previous law that made libel or sedition against the president a crime. And the Press Freedom Act dealt with that after much consultation and much discussions within Liberia, and the recognition that perhaps that was a challenge to press freedom. I think also, as I said, Liberia is very open in terms of access to information, and in fact, in a lot of matrices, although not utilized often, Liberia's Freedom of Information Act is one of the most, is widely available for use, although not used often. And that's something we have to work on in terms of getting people more aware of the availability of some of these laws. In terms of protection of freedom of expression of personal freedoms, I think one of the things that the Judiciary Conference was intended to do was to look at how we could improve some of our processes in the courts to make people more secure in terms of protection of economic rights, personal rights. When people have been accused of crimes, how we can get them through the system faster to protect their rights and liberties, how to ensure that pretrial detainees, the rights of those people are protected, and to reduce the amount of pretrial detainees currently in the system. All of those are towards more protection of personal rights and liberties. And as I said earlier, I think in terms of protection of the press and individual access to digital rights and such, I really don't see that, generally speaking. I think Liberia does very well, and I think the data shows that in terms of allowing people to have free access to information. We don't generally censor access to digital information at all. And so, yes, we can discuss how can we be even more open, I guess, and protective. But I think where we are right now is we are not really in the business of censorship as a country, and I don't think we've ever done that. You know, I do believe one of the instances that may be impacting the data, and I'll speak to it briefly, is at some point there was, in terms of digital rights, there was a blackout on one particular day. And I think that was perhaps related to national security issues, but you don't see Liberia generally having blackouts of internet or interfering in people's access to you know, the internet and such. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor, how are we doing with time?
Ambassador, we're doing very well with time. In fact, we have totally another 30 minutes, and there are questions that are in the chat as well, which could be addressed and discussed. If you would like to look at the chat, or the communications office at Lancelot could help with that.
Okay, let me see. I'm trying to open up the view here, full screen, and then yeah, I've gone to the chat room. Yes, I see a question there on very interesting question on how do we remove the barriers to women's rights, political, social, and economic participation. I think that would be, I think Kula had addressed some of those questions. So we don't need to repeat. And then there's a very long commentary in terms of the rights of indigenous and tribal people. Has Liberia ratified the ILO convention? ILO, I guess that would be the International Labour Organization Convention of 1969. I do not see any record on that. And if it is ratified, it ensures that the right of communities to consultations regarding their land. This would aid in addressing a lot of the tribal land disputes. Councillor Dorliae. Councillor, you'd like to take a shot at that?
Sure. Specifically, yeah. I'm not sure that we have ratified that particular convention, but I do know Liberia has very extensive requirements as it relates to community participation. Land disputes, but we have very extensive requirements both at the Land Commission and in our general processes at the FDA as well, in terms of community rights and how you ensure community participation in the process. So I know that our processes are extensive to ensure communities are engaged, but I'm not sure particularly that we have ratified that convention, and that is one of the things that we can look at and see if we haven't, you know, perhaps what are the steps to do it, or what is the barrier to doing that? Thank you.
All right, Ambassador, let me just contribute as someone who have been a resident or a member of a community that have been very active when it comes to the issue of the concession, particularly in Grand Cape Mount County. Are you there? Is Dr. Conte there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. Right. I was going to share an experience or experiences with you and the rest of the team, is that like Councillor Dorliae said, Liberia may or may not have ratified the convention. However, but on the local level, I think we're doing well when it comes to the need for community participation. As maybe some of you may be aware, Cape Mount is one of the counties that is a concession area with the Mano. It used to be the Sam Darby palm plantation company. Now it's a Mano plantation company where like a large sum of land was given to the company to do some investment. And the community, from the very beginning, it was a very challenging time where community farmlands and their sacred areas were taken away. And as part of the concession agreement that was entered into with the Liberian government and the Malaysian company then, there was a lot of challenges. There was still some fights and many things went on. But as of today, the conversation and dialogue has improved in getting the community involved, even though there's still challenges that the government and the country needs to improve on. But however, we've come from where there was a limited or no existence of community involvement, very active involvement in the decision-making process of these concession areas. But from the example of Grand Cape Mount County, it's been improved, though there's still a need to improve it more, especially when it comes to this corporate social responsibility of these companies, because you still have issue of water and access to facilities that the company needs to put in place. But at least the door of dialogue has been open, and there has been a form of conversation and dialogue happening at the community level. I thought to add that.
Okay, thank you very much for that personal experience. We're very grateful. There is a question on what are some of the yardstick? I would like to know the index report of women participation, rights, and inclusion. I think this person is talking about the score for women participation and rights and inclusion. And to just answer that question, I don't know, maybe one of our, Camila or Ines can help with that, but I see on the sheet here, Liberia scored, I think six in 2019. Liberia ranked 6th in equal political representation, and 32nd in equal civil liberties. And there were some improvements in the trend for equal political representation, plus 5.8. Then, although equal civil liberties declined by 7.2. I don't know if our presenters want to help with that question, or we can continue. As I said earlier, it's unfortunate that we didn't have a presentation on gender. You know, this is one area that is very, very important. The whole issue of gender inequality in Liberia. I know that when I was at the University of Liberia, in the 90s, we participated in a lot of programs that was in the language of then in the 90s. You know, on I think they were trying to ratify then the CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and we participated in that. And the UNDP was had brought in a gender expert that worked with the interim government then, and that snowballed into the establishment of the Ministry of Gender, which later on became the Ministry of Gender and Social Protection. And I think that is the reason why, if you look at the gender scores, Liberia has one of the highest in terms of the civil liberties for women. Fourth overall, 91.1, according to the index, you know, the indicator. Then over the last 10 years, the score was moderately low, for plus 0.1, but you know, it suggests that some improvements have been made. I don't know what our two female panelists, you know, have to say about that in terms of this gender mainstreaming. Then gender mainstreaming, I think that was the language that was used in the 90s. I don't know whether they are still used. Kula, maybe you can help with that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I worked at the Ministry of Gender before as head of the Adolescent Girls Division, as you mentioned in the introduction. I will just talk a little briefly. I think we've come a long way. All of us may be aware, Liberia is, as the rest of Africa, a very patriarchal system or society. And so that is also seen in some of the discussions that was held earlier when I mentioned on the challenges that women face in the political spectrum. So yes, we've had the Ministry of Gender. We've had some aspect of support, but there are still major challenges when it comes to women representation that I've mentioned, but also when it comes to issue of reproductive health and rights and access to justice. Rape and sexual gender-based violence remain high, even though we have a criminal code E that deals specifically with that particular crime, and there's a rape law, which is something that the country has done to address these issues. However, rape remains high, and trying to have access to justice for these cases is a very tiring and slow process. Sometimes because the court processes are so long and tedious, and even gathering evidence and even support of victims have been very challenging, especially when it comes to sexual reproductive health and rights and issues relating to sexual gender-based violence. And again, women still today suffer gender-based violence from the male counterparts. And I mean, if you check the Ministry of Gender, there's a whole data on the high rate of such, and the current report on the current status of women and girls in Liberia. But yes, there's definitely been that awareness where people are aware, and as you mentioned, Ambassador, on the languaging, how our languages have improved when it comes to women issues. So there's that awareness on rights, women's involvement, the need to bring women at the table. And the Liberian women have famous songs about no longer men in front and the women at the back. There's a famous Sabasa song. Is that awareness in our social justice languages? You can hear, let's support our women. Even in high schools, people are aware that there's something called gender issues. There's something called women's participation. There's something called let's give the women the opportunity. However, on the ground, there's still a lot of work needs to be done. I mean, I've not gone in depth of what the index reported, but I see here there's about 50%. So that means it's like 50-50. And like I mentioned, there's a very good opportunity because our population is almost 50-50. I mean, the last census report that we had, it was 48 women were 48%. So that's almost 50-50. So that means we need to be able to use the numbers that we have to support women in all of the different, aspects, support our court system, particularly Criminal Code E, because on the ground, there's not much happening. So we need to put our money where our mouth will be or is, and we need to support young women. So it's challenging on the ground. But one of the other things that I want to mention is the divide. If you go to the rural communities, you will definitely see how rural women are coming to the forefront. Even the communities are highlighting and seeing women and involving them into the everyday discourse. And I mean, for example, in Grand Cape County, you will have some of the town chiefs are females. This is a very traditional patriarchal county. However, over the last, I would say 10, 15 years, the towns and villages who've made women their town chiefs and even to the level of paramount chiefs, the chieftaincies are traditional structures and leadership structures within our country. And when you have chiefs, chief title or paramount chiefs titles given to women, that's a big deal. So you have, for example, in Cape Town, you have about 2 women who are paramount chiefs, and there are many towns and villages who are telling the community that this is our town chief, and the town chiefs who are female. So we're getting there. I'm very optimistic. I'm hopeful that in the next 10 years, the conversation we're having today may increase, but there's still a lot needs to happen on the ground. We need to connect women to resources, and women also at the chain of the economic ladder. We need to improve giving women resources to be able to, giving them the opportunity to be empowered, where they will be able to get the resources that they need. But again, it's a gradual process, and we're getting there. Women are doing the best. Thank you.
A gradual process, and we're getting there. Councillor, Dorliae.
Yeah, if I could just come in briefly. Thank you. I see as comment by one of the participants here that says that there are structural barriers to accessing rights which mirror the power dynamics, not only along gender lines, but also along economic lines. And I think we do have to acknowledge that in as much as we can do certain policy reforms and try to have government make changes that will improve economic rights and political or domestic rights for women, that there are structural barriers, cultural barriers at times that makes it difficult for government to act. And I'll give you an example of the domestic violence law. I think we all know that even President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, in trying to get the domestic violence law passed, there has always been difficulty with that. And it's because there are very strong cultural conversations and discussions that at times are difficult to have, or, that will lead to us making a real decision as to how to deal with that particular issue. And so I think what the government ultimately did was, okay, let's separate that and not hold up the entire domestic violence law.
Councillor, I can't hear you.
It seems she froze for a moment, Ambassador.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for Councillor to join, there's a question here for Ms. Roca and Ms. Ines, which is very interesting. I had that in mind also. Why do you have these zeros in some subcategories? The specific question from Ronald Weeks says, what contributes to the score of 0 in the subcategory of rights protection against discrimination. And there are also zeros for equal access to public services, and 0 for the laws on violence against women. Ms. Roca?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm going to...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Fantastic. I'm going to put up like a quick screen share so that we can answer to both questions, the question about the drivers of change and the question about the zeros, because they are very much related. So on the one hand, I just wanted to draw your attention on this. So this showcases the drivers of change for Liberia in the 10-year period, okay? So here we see that the positive drivers of change are here on the right-hand side of the screen: equal civil liberties for women, equal access to public services for women, and laws on violence against women. On the left side, we see the negative change, what drives the negative change, and we are still looking at the decade, okay? However, when we restrict our area of focus within the time frame, and we look at the difference between the 2015-2019 time period, so the most recent 5 years within the decade, you can already see, and I'm going to do it here with the data, you can already see a major change. And this is quite important because you can see that now we have like 4 indicators under the positive drivers of change, meaning that these indicators are the ones that have been responsible for slowing down the deterioration of the decade. And possibly, we hope that this will also be the drivers of change for a reverse in the path of the gender subcategory. And the element that remains a challenge, and this is also something that has been discussed in the previous panel, is the indicator that looks at the socioeconomic opportunity for women. As discussed as well when we presented the continental data, this is a trend that has been quite consistent across other African countries. And I think this is also something that interlinks with other elements that we are going to see in the next panel that relates more to Foundation for Economic Opportunity and to what extent the decade of growth in Africa has been reflected in increased socioeconomic opportunities for women as well as girls and youth in general. So this is really like what remains as a challenge. Then I don't know, Ines, if you want to also share the microphone and take us through what are the reasons for these 0 change scores that we see highlighted here.
Sure. I mean, I think the reason for the 0 scores is basically that there have not been really much improvement in these areas according to the data we're using to measure these things. So that means basically the level of laws on violence against women has kind of remained the same as it has been 2010. The same with the equal access to public services for women. So I think that's kind of the reason. Let me go to the other question regarding protection against discrimination and basically the 0 score that Liberia gets for these. So if we dig a bit deeper into this indicator, it's made of 3 sub-indicators. So we measure the protection against discrimination along ethnic discrimination. So we've got protection against ethnic discrimination, we've got protection against religious discrimination, and we do have protection against sexual orientation discrimination. And actually Liberia does score 0 for all of these as well. So to kind of answer a little bit on kind of what are we measuring here, this is very much an indicator that assesses whether there's any official mechanisms in the country where people no matter the different kinds of discrimination they might be facing, to which they can go to, and then to which they can report their claims, and then this mechanism would investigate these claims. But also whether these mechanisms not only exist, but also whether they're like active, and whether they're doing like programs to kind of reduce or combat these different sorts of discrimination. And also another important aspect of this is as well whether, if these mechanisms exist, also whether they're like accessible for the most members of the specific group that we're looking at here. So people of a religious minority or an ethnic minority or a sexual orientation-based minority. So this is kind of what we're looking at. And the score of 0 seems to indicate that these mechanisms do not seem to exist in Liberia, they seem to be working. So this is kind of where this would come from, this kind of low score. And I guess like Liberia isn't the only country on the continent that kind of it receives this kind of low score. There's more countries that are having similar lack of such mechanisms.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dorliae is still having some problems, so let me just read two of the questions. There's one from Robin Chan, and he says structural and cultural traditions can be more intimidating than institutional barriers. Okay, that sounds very academic, but if somebody wants to address it. Then there's another one, Madam Kula, this is from George Da. The last name is not showing fully. Madam Kula, according to what you said, that the Liberian demographic for female representation is about 49.7%. So what are some of the education awareness raising programs so far that the gender ministry has put into place to give women rights in voting? And then there's another one, again from Robin Chan. It says, yes, gender inequality is pervasive. More education and training at all levels of government, and especially schools, primary to tertiary. So, Councillor, how are we doing with time? I'm sorry, I've not been.
Well, I think that we do have to wrap up in, we have 3 minutes to wrap up, including the concluding remarks from you on your overview. If I may just, Ambassador, moderator, interject, if someone could say something with respect to people with disability and socioeconomic opportunities for people with disability in terms of inclusion and equality. I don't know if there's any comments that the panelists would like to make on that, or you, sir.
Okay, since is Councillor still here, Councillor Dorliae? If not, and since I'm the only panelist, I could say a thing or two on people with disability and what the country has really done in that aspect, if you will.
Yes, please keep in mind the time.
Right, right. Just very quickly. What it's been challenging, again, this is something that the Ministry of Gender, Social and Children and Social Protection deals with. One thing that have happened, the space of civil society, I was interested to see how civil society scored on the report, on the indexed. One thing civil society has been able to do is to open space for these issues, and there has been a lot of organizations that support people with disability, even though, yes, there are some aspects where access, again, has been a challenge, but participation in terms of voices of people with disability have really been able to come to the fray. There's also the commission, a whole commission has been formulated, it's been in operation for a while now, a commission on disability that have been working very recently. A very young woman who have been an advocate for a very long time was recently appointed as head of the commission on disability. So again, when it comes to participation, yes, there has been a lot of progress on that. But then when it comes to access, sometimes access to, for example, structure, buildings, for example, we still have archaic structures that they're not easily accessible to persons with disability. And disability could be physical disability and visual disability, or even hearing impairment. So there's still lots of challenges, but however, I wanted to interject that we've made some progress when it comes to participation in that light, but on access it's been a problem.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of the panelists, Councillor Paul Dorliae, Kula, Fofana, and those who were not able to make it, Ernest Jala, especially our sister, the former Minister of Gender, who unfortunately had an accident. I would like to thank Madam President, our host, Councillor Cooper, Executive Director of Filia Weeks, my colleague, and our presenters of the Liberian Scorecard, Kamala Rokas and Ines Schultz, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, for inviting us to participate in this innovative webinar on making progress in Liberia. The presenters have spoken very well about participation rights and inclusion, and we thank them based on their expert perspectives. PRI is one of the 4 categories of the IIAG in which Liberia has made progress. The others being security and the rule of law, foundations of economic opportunities, and human development. The presentations, in a way, were reality checks to PRI, especially when the presenters drilled down to the indicators, which in a way gave us hopeful signs that things will improve in the next 5 or 10 years. And so if development is conceived as freedom, as suggested by the Ibrahim Index and its categories, and subcategories and indicators, the Liberian Objective Scorecard on PRI suggests that all stakeholders, the government, civil society, and our international partners must work together to remove barriers and deprivations, in order for the scores to improve over the next decade. And we remain optimistic, as Kula said, that this will happen. Thank you very much, Councillor, for the opportunity.
Ambassador, let me say particular thanks to you for your very valuable moderating of this particular session and the knowledge and experience that you have brought that helped to facilitate these discussions. And I also would like to say thanks to Councillor Dorliae, who unfortunately seems to have had some technical difficulty that inhibited her continuation of this program, for her valuable insight. And of course, Madam Fofana, Kula Fofana, whose broad experience in administration, politics, and gender advocacy has been most valuable during these discussions. So we do want to say thank you very much for the very valuable and insightful contributions that you've made. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Now we will recess until 3 o'clock GMT, Monrovia time, and then we'll come back and talk about what underscores a lot of this, and that is human development. How does human development impact the various indices that we've looked at? Thank you very much. So we'll reconvene at 3.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.